Welcome to the new episode of All That Jazz. I'm your host, Matyash or Matt, and I have with me Daniel, and we're going to talk about remote viewing and his website where he has courses on remote viewing. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. Are you offering these courses for free? I was just checking your website, and I was like, I thought it was a paid course.
No, it's not paid. It's technically not a remote viewing course so much. I do have a link to Courtney Brown's Farsight Institute and that is a free course and it's totally free. And my the what is described as the course on my website is actually a set of remote viewing targets. And basically, I mean, it's structured as a quiz or as a quiz within a course. It's really it's just
Mm-hmm.
it's just a set of actual remote viewing targets. And what makes my website unique is that these are very unusual.
Okay. So I guess let's start with the beginning. What's your background?
Well, I studied philosophy and psychology in Florida. Um, but that prepared me for remote viewing. They don't really take parapsychology seriously there. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I initially encountered remote viewing when I became interested in ufology through Richard Dolan's his YouTube channel, and he I hadn't really taken it too seriously, and I found that his and he approached it from a really scholarly perspective, and that really got me interested in it. And I found that there is something to that, and then at some point I learned that his wife does something called remote viewing, and I had never heard of that. I definitely never taken the concept of psychic ability seriously, and but because I had come to regard him as such a credible source, I looked into it and I found that I was capable of it, and I learned through studying professional remote viewers, which are, I'm not like a professional trainer or anything. I always direct people to someone like Paul H. Smith or Lynn Buchanan or one of those guys, and but I found that everyone is capable of doing this, and this is just a natural human faculty.
Everyone is capable of doing like literally. I could like in a couple hours. I could start doing and picking up things that I
Absolutely, and
would
I mean, in a
have
couple,
no idea
really a couple
before.
minutes. I mean, the protocol is so simple that it's really like, I mean, it's simpler than even like basic arithmetic. Yeah, but it's just a normal human faculty, and
Wow.
I find that it's unfortunate that there are a lot of practicing psychics out there who I don't know if they, people just like an IQ, like IQ, it's on a distributed on a bell curve. Some people are extraordinarily good at it, and some people are just sort of okay at it. But really everyone is capable of doing it to
Right.
some degree, and it's unfortunate that a lot of practicing and well-known psychics make it seem like they're super special and that they're like an X-Men or something, and it's not like that. Everyone is capable of doing this to some degree.
Well, to me, it does seem a bit because I remember back in the day, I was I remember me and my friend wanted to be at this lecture. By the way, the lecture was David Hawkins, and we knew there was this lecture going on, and we couldn't be there. I was in Europe, and he was in New York, and the lecture was in Arizona, and we thought, what if we could somehow be there without being there? But the first thing we thought about was astral projection, which I guess it definitely is different
Yeah.
than remote viewing, but it has similar tenets to it. So is it okay? Let's break it down because like remote viewing is not just for for the present time. You said it's also for the past and the future, which kind of freaks me out. The future bit freaks me out. But let's stick to the past first. Like, So could I go back and see some of the events that happened in
You
my
can do
life?
anything from something that happened. In fact, there's a declassified CIA file from 1984. The remote viewing was conducted by Mel Riley, and that was it's actually on the CIA's website. It's declassified now, but it was a remote viewing of the Cydonia complex on Mars, 1 million BC. So you could remote view your last birthday, or where you went to get ice cream last week, or you could remote view what happened 1 million years ago on Mars.
Wow. Okay, my question is this: how do you know it's credible? How do you know? Because okay, I'll tell you, I was researching the Farsight Institute because it's been recommended to me by some other people, and and recently, and apparently they were researching the this is quite controversial, I guess, 9/11 events, and they
Oh
were
yeah.
expecting to find that the conventional the terrorists hijacking the planes and crashing into buildings, but what they found was actually not that. There was something different, and I guess that there was that it was an inside job. Basically, that's what the trailer insinuated. I didn't watch the whole thing because it was apparently 4 hours long, and you have to pay for it. So, but okay, what my question basically is it possible that you're going in the past and seeing something, but it's actually not happened?
Yes, it is possible to experience what's called analytic overlay, and that's when the, I guess, sort of left brain way of thinking imposes an interpretive grid onto the ideally right brain intuitive apprehension of what you're trying to get. What makes Courtney Brown's Farsight Institute is, I think he offers good training. He's a lot more adventurous than I there's a spectrum, in my opinion, of how epistemologically conservative somebody is. Basically, like, epistemology are thinking about the scope, limits, and nature of knowledge, and some people are they're I'm very much a fallibilist. I major in the human tendency to I major in uncertainty rather than certainty, and that's closer. Paul H. Smith, I think, is even more like that, and he's very good. Um, and whereas Courtney Brown, he what makes him controversial, and I remember Paul Smith saying in an interview with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove that Courtney Brown maybe sometimes writes a check that he can't cash, figuratively speaking. That remote viewing ideally, uh, it does require ordinary empirical verification. Like, you have to go to the site and see what they described is actually accurate. And a lot of times we can't do that. I mean, we can't go 1 million years into the past, and then go to Mars and see if there really are these tall humanoid aliens there who live around the pyramids in the face. But I think when you get a lot of people remote viewing these kinds of targets, and they all start reporting something very similar, that this is very suggestive, and it gets people to begin to ask questions about, well, what really happened at such and such a time. And but by the way, I actually did once remote view the morning of 9/11, and I did not know that's what I was remote viewing in. And I did see, my remote viewing was not nearly as detailed or impressive as Courtney's was, but what I did get were visions of white, what appeared to be American military men, that they were associated with what was going on, and they were anticipating something that had to do with missiles or explosives or something. But I can't draw any definitive conclusions from that, certainly. But I do think it's interesting that I didn't see like Arab terrorists flying into building, and I
Right.
could totally be wrong. So people, I always encourage people to try and replicate my viewings to either see if we can verify or falsify or what, or if there's a convergence there or divergence or what.
Certainly, I think the double blind testing is useful.
Yeah.
My concern is even with double blind, I think it's possible that the intention entangles with the target. So that would explain why everybody's getting the same visions because uh, um, how would I describe it as the I don't know if you've seen there's an interview I did with Nisha Manek and she was saying that intention intention can change a lot of things, can change the space, and apparently in the past 20 years the the testing of drugs has been really skewed, especially in U.S. because the the placebo effect is getting is on the increase for some reason, and there's speculation that the physical nature of the universe is changing. Anyway, that's neither here nor there for this discussion, but the thing that's most interesting to me is that is it possible? Do you think that the intention of the tester saying you write down, and this is let's say you want to be on Mars 1 billion years ago, whatever, or 1,000 years ago, and you want this to be that, but then everybody gets the same thing because maybe you got it first or so. I don't know. Like you expect that result. You see that would be I mean, I know it's a double blind experiment, but still, you could. The intention part, I think it's still a
Oh yeah,
factor. You know what I
that's
mean?
definitely in remote viewing that's called telepathic overlay. So that actually is a known possibility, and there actually is a there's a what's it called? There's an essay called "Tip of the Iceberg: Placebo, Experimenter Expectation, and Interference Phenomena in Subconscious Information Flow." And it basically does deal with that. Lynn Buchanan and um, Daz Smith and a couple others, comment on this in the. I don't remember. I think it is this article that I'm referring to, but yeah, and that is one of the reasons ordinary empirical verification is important because in fact, some critics of remote viewing have suggested in the past that what you're actually doing is telepathy, and like I said, that can happen, but ordinary empirical verification um, uh, helps with that, and um, there are some. That's why a lot of these more unusual targets are only suggestive rather than uh, confirming because it, at this time we don't have the ability to look at all of these, but there have been times where a remote viewing was either uncertain or they actually thought it was wrong, and then later data proved that it was correct. Like when when Ingo Swann
Oh,
was
wow.
with the CIA, they had him do all kinds of these weird targets like aliens on the moon and structures on the moon, and they seemed to think that it was totally legitimate. And in fact, Major General Albert Stubblebine, um, who worked with telekinesis and remote viewing both, was totally convinced that they had used remote viewing to discover uh, machines on Mars. But in the case of Ingo Swann, he they had him remote view what was oh, okay, it was Jupiter, and he described a planet with rings around it, and he described the rings, and they didn't know at that time. We didn't know yet that Jupiter had rings, so we thought he had got it wrong. But later on, we discovered Jupiter does have rings, and he had just basically described them accurately. So Um, yes, sometimes we just might have to wait, and unfortunately, sometimes we might never know. We might never be able to either verify or falsify the remote viewing results. I think there are some sort ways to circumvent telepathic overlay to some degree. Like I had I've had people like this is another really controversial one. And I like to be adventurous, but also adventurous in my experiments, but very conservative in my conclusions, is how I would describe it. And I asked people to
Right.
remote view the physical surroundings of Adolf Hitler during the last week of his life, because a lot of people who remote view this kind of target get something that seems different from the mainstream view. And one of the viewers I did, a couple of them have described what sounds like an underground base in a mountainous region, and I had one viewer describe areas of Antarctica, that features of that area that I was not aware of. So I think that would be
Wow.
an example of one way you can circumvent telepathic overlay is if they're describing something in an area and that you know the tasker didn't even know about it, then I think that suggests that there might be something to it.
So the mountainous area would suggest, I mean, not the mountainous area, sorry, the other one, the I mean, the Antarctica would suggest that he escaped, basically.
Yeah, I mean, this person described a mountainous area and also volcanoes, and I had no idea that there were volcanoes in Antarctica. I mean, I don't really know much about Antarctica at all, but yeah, I've had a couple different people remote view what looks like an underground base, and then planes. There's like a downward slope runway where these airplanes go in, and there's like scientific labs and stuff, and they're doing experiments on monkeys, and that could all and there's always and I learned that I read into this more and found that that is one of the uh, parts of this conspiracy theory that they were doing experiments there, you know, and I didn't know anything about that, so I don't think it could have been telepathy in these kinds of instances because they described things that I simply did not. They couldn't have been reading my mind because it wasn't in my mind. And again, we still do have to be very cautious about coming to conclusions, but and I always try to reiterate that because I know, I mean, if I you know, I don't want people saying, oh, this guy thinks we definitely proved that Hitler escaped and lived in Antarctica or something, but it, I mean, I think remote viewing remote viewing can act as a very effective supplement to more conventional empirical methods. It's definitely not intended to replace it. Although sometimes, many times when the government was when the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency were conducting these experiments, they found. I mean, there were a whole bunch of successes that they were able to verify.
Are they still doing these experiments, the CIA? Are they still, or did they close it down?
I think they are, but the official story is that in the mid 90s, the CIA decided not to continue with it. I personally think that the many of the results were such a dramatic effect that I seriously doubt that they stopped it. I think they probably just went underground with it, so to speak.
Right. It doesn't seem like something that would discover that there's something on other planets that we didn't know before, that they would just completely like stop doing that,
Oh
you know?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. That's. I think it's a ridiculous. The more I've gotten into remote viewing and also studying ufology from a more academic perspective, the less I trust my government. Um, I mean, Lynn Buchanan. You know, he was a sergeant. He's one of the main um, teachers of remote viewer today. He's one of the few that I would regard straightforwardly and without hesitation regard as like an authentic school. Like he actually replaced Joe McGonigal in the military for this, and Joe McGonigal is a retired special project intelligence officer for the SSPD, the SSD, and the 902nd MI group, and he left Stargate in 1984 with a Legion of Merit award for providing information to 150 targets that were unavailable from other sources. So this isn't, they weren't just like messing around with this. This was a very serious espionage tool that they had really substantive effects with. And Lynn Buchanan has come forward recently and said that he was tasked with remote viewing extraterrestrials, and Joe McGonigal was too, and that the people he works for believe that they have acquired substantive information about this topic. Like they don't regard it as speculative. So I mean, some people are good enough to where they're good enough, and also supplemental information has been provided from conventional empirical sources that lead them to believe that, like, I mean, according to him, that he was shown files in his capacity as a remote viewer for the government that he was remote viewing aliens, basically.
Wow. So, in your experience, do you think aliens definitely exist? As far as not they exist far away, but that they're actually here, that they come here as well.
Oh yeah, I think they've been here for a very long time, and we've had some high ranking people from very governments from different countries that have come forward and said, like, what was his Major General Vasily Veremenko. He was with the he recently discussed a part of the KGB whose purpose was to control the alien presence in Russia. And I mean, that would be one of a ton of examples.
How did they do that though?
I'm not sure. I'm kind of skeptical that we even have that any of us have substantive control over these guys, because they seem to be so much more advanced than us. And I don't really, I don't. It's my, and this is just my opinion. I could be totally wrong. I don't think they're hostile, so I'm not too worried about it. But there's one there's one declassified CIA file that records a 250 page that briefly summarizes a 250-page leaked KGB report of a UFO attack but it was like a supposedly a retaliation. They had knocked a UFO out of the air with a surface air missile and caused it to crash, and these short little gray guys with big heads and the big black eyes came.
What?
Yeah, and they used some kind of energy weapon to instantly kill like 21 Soviet soldiers. This is also in the CIA, on their website, and it's a description of a KGB report that was leaked after the fall of the Soviet Union. There was a big data dump, and
When is this? When was this happen? This attack and retaliation?
I'm actually not sure. I think it's actually blacked out in the file. I can send you the file afterwards, and you
Yeah,
can
sure.
take a look at it. It actually happened in Kiev, in Ukraine, technically.
Right, right.
But yeah, that's what was described, and the little gray guys, the grays, are very commonly described. I know a lot of remote viewers who have had visions of them. I have what I believe to be visions of them when I was tasked with remote viewing a part of Mars, and yeah, so they're
Wow.
one
So
of.
they look like in the movies, basically,
Yeah, from what I
like
can
what you
tell,
see in
the
I don't know, the first encounters of the third kind or something.
yeah, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That it's
Right.
there are what I refer to, and I didn't make up this term. I forgot where I got it from though, but I call them the usual suspects. There are there are a couple species of extraterrestrials, and they're apparently one of them. And they roughly do look like this mainstream caricature where they're like 3.5 to 4 feet tall, and they have very large heads and big black eyes, and they're sort of a grayish off-white color. And there's the short ones, and then there's supposedly the taller ones that are, I think, like 5 to 6 feet tall, and they're like the doctor or physician types, and the short ones are supposedly the drones who conduct the abductions and so on.
So there's actually like abductings are not just like conjured up things, but actually people go through these.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, Lynn Buchanan, whom I had just described earlier as having remote viewed extraterrestrials for the U.S. government, he says that he was told by the government that he was abducted by aliens, and that they had remote viewers remote view his abduction and verify it, and that's how they knew that this had happened to him.
Wow. So yeah, I don't know if I believe in that, but the more I talk to people, people are saying that this is an actual thing. And also, you mentioned Stargate. I thought this was only a show, but you're saying that this was a government program dealing with viewing and psychic phenomena.
Oh yeah, that's the name of the that was the actual name of their that was the actual name of their program when it ended the Stargate. I think it was Project Stargate. But yeah, but when they had terminated it in 1995, that's what it had been called. It was originally it had gone by a couple different names. When it first started out, it was Scan 8. That was in like the very early 1970s, I think, and it at some point it went by. In 1979, it was referred to as Grill Flame. In 1977, a few years before that, it was referred to as Gondola Wish. At one point, it was Sunstreak. So it's undergone a couple changes. But yeah, at one point in the early 1980s, it was in Scum Center Lane Project (ICLP). 1985, it was redesignated Sunstreak after it was taken over by the Defense Intelligence Agency Scientific and Technical Intelligence Directorate. But yeah, this happens a lot more than a lot than I come across this a lot. The stuff that shows up in mainstream media that is the names at least are based on something real, and it's kind of suspicious. The John D'Souza, he's a former FBI agent, and he said that he came under investigation because by the FBI, his own agency, because they thought he was leaking that he and I think the director liked to watch X Files,
Mm-hmm.
and just from watching the shows, I think one of the higher ups became suspicious that John D'Souza was leaking information
To the
to
show.
the
To the
yeah
show.
to the show, and because of the similarity, and he almost got in trouble. He was kind of freaked out about it, but
Isn't that
there
common though? That this happens a lot. That sometimes the government works with the movie studios to make a movie that's close to reality almost.
yes, and I definitely think that happened with Steven Spielberg with Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
You think so?
D- Yeah, Dr. Stephen Greer actually insists and I don't agree with everything he says or does. I do respect him though, and I think he's an important figure. But he insists that Spielberg was in on it, and that Close Encounters of the Third Kind is not actually a fiction movie. It's a docudrama based on real events, and that seems to be alluding to so-called Project Serpo, in which these gray aliens actually took some of our astronauts to their planet and then returned them. And I don't know if that's true, but he insists um, that this is true of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I've read that Grant Cameron talks about this in his book, Managing Magic. It's about the government's role in the Disclosure Project, and a lot of these alien movies are seem to be sort of tests to see. Part of it is they're trying to see how people will react, because they're one of the reasons is that they don't disclose, supposedly is they're afraid of the chaos it could cause. And like the day the earth stood still is supposedly an example of this, that there's some truth to it, and that we were visited by humanoid aliens who warned us of against nuclear activity. And what Walt Disney had on its staff for one of its movies, I don't know if that was it. I don't know. I don't remember if Walt Disney made The Day the Earth Stood Still. I'm not a huge cinema buff, but
Okay.
they did. I mean, Walt Disney himself was supposedly, uh, in contacts with the FBI, and they were seeding some of their stuff. They were working with Walt Disney at some point.
They were showing him what they had, and he was making movies and fiction and stuff based on what they were telling me. Is that what you're saying?
I think at some point, I don't remember if it was Walt Disney or whoever made. Let me just check. But yeah, I do think that Walt Disney did use information in some of his cinema that the FBI had given him. Absolutely.
Well, what about I've heard in recently in Nisha Manek's book that for Saddam Hussein they used a remote viewer, and I think it was a she accurately described where Saddam Hussein was hiding, and I'm not sure if they relied exclusively on that information, but I think if I'm recalling it correctly, they used the information to, along with other information, to eventually catch him in 2003. Um, so, do you know
Well,
anything about this?
during the Gulf War, remote viewers were reported to have suggested his whereabouts. I'm not familiar from. I'm not sure of any independent confirm verification of that. That would be earlier, of course, than the
Yes.
2003. But there are a, there are a lot of very similar accounts from from the 1970s and especially the 80s of similar successes in military and espionage. I certainly wouldn't doubt that. Um, I mean, that would if they did do that with Saddam Hussein, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did. That would certainly confirm that they are still conducting these programs even after
Oh,
they've
yes.
said they've supposedly terminated them. I don't think that's something that they would quickly abandon. I think probably all governments use that.
Right. And there was a guest on my show that's saying that there will be a big declassified CAA information dump quite shortly. Actually, do you think that this is something in the works to get people kind of prepared that there might be possible alien information out there?
Um, I think the government has been gradually disclosing this over several decades, possibly as long as 70 years. But I don't think they want their fingerprints on it. I think they're trying to. I don't think I don't think the president is ever going to come out and say, okay, guess what, you guys, there's aliens. It's all true, because they're afraid of I think they're afraid of the chaos it might cause, and also they don't want their fingerprints on it because of the questionable nature of some of the things they've done, and they don't want to have to answer the difficult questions about why they've been hiding it and the possible trillions of dollars that they've spent on investigating this with our taxpayer dollars without even being told what
Right.
was going on. So um, I think the CIA has been doing a gradual drip drip disclosure, this gradual controlled disclosure, and not only them, but other agencies as well. And they've been mixing it with disinformation. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations was involved in this in the 1980s, I wouldn't be surprised if they still are.
But don't you think that if anybody could disclose anything like this big, would be the non-PC, non-politically correct president like Donald Trump? He would. I think if he knows anything, maybe he's trying to buy time, and maybe doing it after the election or something. But it does seem that he would be the one to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, what if if he is in fact enough of a wild card to do something like that? That would certainly be nice. When he, I think, early on in taking office, or possibly shortly prior to it, he said that he wasn't really a believer in UFOs, but that he was open minded. But then, just very recently, this interview with his son, he said his son asked him about it on camera, and he said, well, "I've heard some interesting things about Roswell, but I'm not going to talk about it." There have been so many presidents that seems to be pro disclosure before going into office, and then after being briefed on it, they decided not to disclose it, and I'm not sure why,
Maybe
but
there just isn't much there, but still, I think they should disclose, everything, just so, because otherwise people are still gonna talk about Roswell and everything, any kind of conspiracy that can come up. If the government seems to be like it's hiding something, people are gonna talk.
oh yeah, and I think we have enough declassified files and memos to make it clear that the government is hiding something. They, in the late 1940s and then 50s, you had first projects Sign and Grudge, which really before Project Blue Book, which was a lot longer. And in the late 40s and early 50s, they were saying, we've investigated this. We know this isn't. It's just hallucinations and weather balloons and nonsense. But some of the files that we've gotten now make it clear that that's not what they really thought. There's one involving from 1949 FBI head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, and he said that the military considers topics concerning UFOs, flying saucers, balls of fire to be top secret.
Mm.
So so they were telling the public that there is nothing, but it's clear that there was something, and whatever it was top secret. They and the yeah, I mean, the 1950 Guy Hodel memo of the FBI report, he described, and you can look this up online. They describe a couple of flying saucers crashing in New Mexico, not only Roswell, but that they believe that he was informed by an Air Force investigator that one of their radars had caused a couple of them to crash, and they even described the alleged occupants that they're these 3 feet tall little gray guys. I don't remember if it describes them as gray, but dressed in some kind of coverall foil, and so I mean, and then you have the Chadwell memo, Marshall Chadwell, with the he was a head scientist with the CIA, and in 1952 he, and these are just a couple of a tons of examples where it's clear that they don't think it's nothing. They declassified files from practically every Air Force base in the U.S. describes UFOs, UFO sightings, but then many of them also UFOs disabling their nuclear weapons, and Robert Hastings covers this in his book very well. It's a history of this whole phenomenon of UFOs disabling nuclear
Is
weapons.
there is there
Happened
also
in
a fear
England.
of the public being so scared? But you said like the public being too scared once they realize this, that the U.S. government has had interactions with aliens. But you said before that you don't think aliens are hostile towards humans. That just in the case of the Soviet Union, you said that they just retaliated by after being knocked down. So it does seem like if they're not so dangerous, then what is the big deal, basically?
Um, well, I think there are several other factors to consider, and also even if hypothetically they're not dangerous, it's hard to imagine how we could ever definitively prove that either to ourselves or to anyone else because the Air Force captain Edward Ruppelt, I think he was the one who said this, that in 1948 there was a document called the Estimate of the Situation, and Major Air Force Major Dewey J. Furnett refers to this as well, and so does J. Allen Hynek. He was a UFO investigator with the Air Force, and apparently the conclusion that they supposedly came to was that uh, the way Captain Ruppelt described it was the situation was UFOs, and the estimate was they were interplanetary, and that they had basically concluded definitively that these are aliens, and their can they didn't want to release that because their reasoning was I think it was either General Roger Ramey or Hoyt S. Vandenberg who said this, but they said how can we convince the public that they're not dangerous when we don't even know that ourselves, and if these beings are so much more advanced than us that if at any given time they decided to become dangerous, there's absolutely nothing we'd be able to do about it. And there are other social and economic considerations. Like there was Grant Cameron talks about an interview he conducted with the metallurgist who worked with Wilbert Smith. And he was head of the Canadian Department of Transport, and he conducted Project Magnet, which is the Canada's version basically of the United States Project Blue Book. And he went back. He corresponded with Dr. Robert Sarbacher, who was a U.S. missile engineer, and Dr. Sarbacher told him that this phenomenon is real and it is aliens. And there's a memo you can find online. It says that this is from 1950. The that flying saucers are real, and it is the most classified topic in the U.S. government, and that it's more classified than the development of the hydrogen
Mm.
bomb, which at that time was not openly known about. It was a very classified project, and basically what the metallurgist said was that after looking at metal that allegedly came from the UFO, that if they decide to tell everyone about UFOs tomorrow. Like sell everything you have today because tomorrow it'll be completely worthless. That the technology they have makes everything we have completely
But
worthless. That the
have we communicated with the aliens though successfully? If they're so far advanced, I mean, they would be able to understand us, but we wouldn't maybe be able to understand them, or they should be able to translate. If they're so far advanced, why can't they like calmly communicate with us what they want?
well the from what from what I've read from people like Lieutenant Colonel Philip de Corso and Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean, and a lot of other people say this as well. Some of them are civilian abductees, and a lot of them are major, major like members of the government and military and intelligence. That these most of the aliens communicate telepathically, and they don't have they don't have trouble communicating with us in when it comes to simple things. But yeah, I mean,
Okay.
in that respect, I really don't think they I don't think they have that much trouble communicating with us. But for some reason, the particular species or group of species that we've encountered is for some reason not disclosing itself openly, and that's one of the possible hypotheses that Grant Cameron discusses in Managing Magic, that it's possible that these beings are behind the disclosure themselves, and that the government is just obeying them, and that they simply don't want to be
Right,
seen.
right. Um,
The form.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your some of the best results that you've gotten. Like, how were you initially trained, by the way? I know you had, I think you had no formal training in like remote viewing, but when you first started, and what was your some of your best results?
Well, I learned just by watching a lot of YouTube videos from the actual like formal trainers, and also reading books on the topic. There are several great books. Paul H. Smith has a bunch that I'd recommend. Lynn Buchanan.
Are these some of the best remote viewers in the world, basically?
Yeah, I mean, well, for what it's worth, I mean, Paul H. Smith is was actually trained. He was actually part of the Stargate program itself, and I've talked with him a great deal about some of this. Lynn Buchanan was actually, they were trained as professionally and as formally as you can really as formally as you can possibly be trained. So there's if there is a if they are not the official teachers, then there are none.
Right,
But
right, right.
so but yeah, they are. They're some of the best. The best results. I wouldn't know where to. I'm not sure how I would define best, but I mean, I can talk about some of the more what for me were emotionally impactful.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I was given the Amelia Earhart, her crashing, and I was able to describe an island that she flew over a week or so before researchers publicly declared that they believed she had flown over this island. It was the resolution of a contentious debate about what she had been doing, or about where she crashed or landed, or what happened. But basically the trajectory of her vehicle, of her plane prior to its crashing, and that would be one example of remote view of what I had alluded to before of initially suggestive remote viewing results that are then that more concrete, conventional, empirical confirmation is provided later on.
Right. So
So
this
that
was
would
an
be.
active story that you followed, and you saw somewhere where she flew over, and then I'm not familiar with the story. What happened with her?
Well, she was she's a well-known pilot. It's a well-known. They've been looking for a plane for a while. She was an American aviation pioneer, and she was the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic
Okay.
Ocean. So yeah, and I had never really been interested in the story. I had a friend task me that as the target, and I didn't know what I was viewing. It was a blind remote view, and I described a barren island, and then I saw something like a plane or something fly very quickly over it, and that was pretty much all that I had seen. And I described that, and and then like a week, and then I was told what the remote viewing target was, and then I think a week or two later, researchers came out and said that they had come to the conclusion that she had flown over this area, and so it seems to suggest that this was accurate.
But when did this happen though? She must have done like this in the '60s, or was it this later on? Or
Oh, this was in the late
Oh,
1930s.
okay,
So
okay,
this was a
okay,
while
yeah.
ago. Yeah.
So, but the researchers discovered now that she flown over that area, but you discovered about same time, basically. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if they've discovered this definitively, but I recall them coming forth with some new information that had they had decided that this was probably what happened. One of the cooler ones I think I've done in recent, well, when the CIA and the U.S. government had Joe McGonigal, he's the guy who Buchanan replaced. They had him remote view the Cydonia complex on Mars, and he had concluded. Well, he and Mel Riley remote viewed this, and they both concluded that there's an ancient civilization there that had died out as the product of really bad geological storms. And I tasked that for somebody. Um, uh, and she described like human like beings that are choking and on wind and there's a storm and they can't breathe, and that's also what they described. So I thought that was very cool. I mean, that I was the tasker for that one, not the
Right,
actual
right, right.
viewer. A recent one that I thought was very cool was the Mage UFO incident in May of this year.
What happened?
Well, only a couple days after it, and this is all public, so I can send you links and the dates and the timestamps are all there. There were reports about helicopters surrounding a UFO, and this was in Brazil in May. And a couple of days after it happened, I had some people remote view it, and they described what looked like these humanoid, basically human-looking beings who one of the viewers said that they were aware of being remote viewed, which is very commonly reported when you're remote viewing
Wow.
extraterrestrial targets. And they describe the they they think it was like a warlike situation where this craft was shot down and then the beings inside are dead. And then this is what they described a couple days after it happened. And then, do you know who Linda Moulton Howe is?
Linda Moulton? No, I don't know.
Well, she made like she's an Emmy award winning director. She made the most like she popularized the cattle mutilation phenomenon and attributed it to extraterrestrials, which I think is correct. And a month after we had conducted the remote viewing that I just described, she said that a Brazilian military figure who she had been in contact with told just said that there were these tall humanoid beings in the UFOs that were shot down, and then shortly after that, another completely independent remote viewer that I had never even heard of, also remote viewed it and got the same
So
results. So
the
we had
Brazilian government would cover it up. Like, was this on the ground or did this like crash in the ocean?
My understanding is that it crashed on the ground and that they recovered the bodies. And what one of the commonly reported extraterrestrial species looks exactly like humans, and they you'll hear them referred to as the Nordic types. But yeah, so some people say they're from the Pleiades constellation. The former Minister of National Defense of Canada, Paul Hellyer, makes reference to this to their Pleiadian alleged Pleiadian origins. But yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly who or what shot them down, but that's like just the general impression
Hmm.
we got that these beings were visiting or on some kind of mission, and that either the and that our Earth governments or Earth military were able to successfully shoot them down.
Wow.
That was one of the more exciting incidents. I mean, I tried to contact Linda Moulton Howe, but she never got back to me. It
Right.
was because we have independently verified remote viewer doing it, and then also supposedly a Brazilian military figure contacting her and telling her that that's actually what happened. And that was long after we had, that was weeks after we had uh, conducted this remote viewing. So
Right.
it doesn't prove anything definitively, but I think it's exciting. I mean, it's very interesting in my
So
opinion.
why would the again the it seems like a lot of governments in the world are covering up because maybe they're trying to protect the people from I don't know finding from people knowing that there's some strange creatures that sometimes fly around and do strange things.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
To talk about the past. So you said this remote viewing probably happened like a week after, so like they went to the past. But you said you can go further down the past, and my interest has always been because I think the life of Jesus and the life of Muhammad, especially because Muhammad was a much more complex figure. The good Muhammad and the bad Muhammad later on, but the dialogue and all that stuff. Like, is it possible to get to go in the past and see exactly like what the person looked like and what they were saying? Obviously, you'd need like in the case of Muhammad, you need Arabic, which I guess they would have a different accent back then, but he'd still kind of. But for Jesus, it'd be Aramaic. And is it possible, basically, to get exact dialogue?
I don't think it's possible. If it is, I don't think we know of any way to do that because of dialogue would be language and it would be a kind of syntax that we I guess a combinatorial syntax that we would use is a very analytic thing, like a so-called left brain
Yes.
thing. Whereas with remote viewing, we're trying to get intuitive impressions that are it sometimes it almost seems like a Quentin Tarantino movie. It's just like a flood of raw impressions rather than analytically precise or accounts of of some kind of syntax, whether linguistic or in the case of people want to know, well, can you use why don't people win the lottery with remote viewing? And you can predict the stock market changes in terms of very basic binaries of is this stock going to go up or down? But beyond that, it's not possible, as far as I know, to apply the kind of analytic precision that would allow you to specify like several consecutive numbers in a row. At
Right.
least I'm not. Lynn, I think Lynn Buchanan says that with a lot of work, it's theoretically possible to come close to it, but I certainly don't know how to do something like that, and I don't know anyone who is capable of that. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, that's not where that would be one of remote viewing's weaknesses. But
Right. It does seem like that.
you can you would be able to describe what they physically look like, though. Yeah, sure.
Well, I guess the ideal would be that it's not remote viewing, but it's kind of like out of body experience, but that you go out of body and you go into the past or into the future. Because apparently there's been research, past life regression hypnosis. There's the
Oh
other
yeah.
side that you can do like a future life hypnosis. Like you can, although I'm a bit skeptical, I think I myself think it's a potential you cannot actually see. Like if things remain unchanged and you go to some, but then again, it's I don't know. It kind of skews to me between like determinism and free choice and what is what. I guess we run into the same dilemmas here for the future for remote viewing. Like, how do you know this is gonna happen? And did anybody win money with remote viewing that they were able to get the numbers or whatever, and or guess who which team is gonna win or so forth?
Oh yeah, all the time. Original in 19 the original people involved with remote viewing in the early 1970s were Dr. Russell Targ and Dr. Hal Puthoff. Dr. Puthoff is actually now on the board of TTSA, the one of the major alien disclosure um, projects after being given he was given the locations by another CIA psychic, Pat Price, of underground alien bases on Earth that they had supposedly discovered with remote viewing. But Dr. Russell Targ, who worked alongside Dr. Hal Puthoff, used a technique developed by Dr. Stefan Schwartz called associative remote viewing, and that's specifically involves precognition of you want to determine one outcome of a binary situation, either yes, no, or is this team or that team going to win, and Russell Targ in 1982 forecast changes in the Monday closing price of the silver futures market 5 days in advance for nine
Hmm.
weeks, 9 Mondays. And they used this technique and they ended up making over a hundred thousand
Back in the day,
dollars.
that was a lot of money.
Yeah, the team had 9 consecutive forecasts and all of them were correct, and they got more than 100 grand. That was a very impressive
But
stat.
then, if that was true, then people would consistently get. If you're really good at remote viewer, you could get like you could find out now who's gonna win. Which of the four teams is gonna win the NBA championship? Let's say.
Well, this would be an example of an unusually extreme success. Usually, the better remote viewers, I think, have anywhere between 70 to 90% accuracy in this associative remote viewing. But there is a fatigue that sets in, and at that point you have to rest for a couple of weeks. I think when we talk about psychics and stuff, people think that it makes you infallible
Right.
and omniscient, like automatically. They'll say, "Well, tell me right now what's going to happen in 2 days or something," and it's not exactly that. It doesn't make you God,
Right, and
for
also
sure.
it indicates that
It
it's not everything is not predetermined. If you say 70% accuracy rate, meaning that there's an element of choice, and if somebody makes one little bit of like, especially in a basketball game or something, like one little decision here and there, but there's like thousands of decisions during the game, and the coach's decisions and who to sub in. So it's like it's so complex. It's a lot more complex than we realize, I think.
Oh yeah, the but in terms of predicting outcomes through precognition, what it allows us to do is circumvent more analytic, analysis based accounts of these complex systems, and we go around that and just look at the simple results. And I mean, in terms of the uh, what you seem to be alluding to is the question of modality, which is possibility versus necessity. And that's related to the issue of free will. Could things have been otherwise? I like to refer to free will as the power of contrary choice or contrariety, that could I have done otherwise, or was it all predetermined? And I mean, the popular Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics tends to look at phenomena on at least some level, on the quantum level at least, as being objectively or inherently indeterminate. That it's probabilistic, and there is it's that we can only it never makes sense to speak of the future in term except in terms of probability, and I mean that's one interpretation. There are other respectable interpretations, like Dr. David Bohm, um, who Bohmian mechanics. This is more of a deterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics, and I suppose of the whole universe, where he is convinced that even on the quantum level thing, even if the rules might be different in some way, it's as deterministic as Newtonian
Wow.
thermodynamics. And but when we get into, and there are a couple quantum mechanic models that are deterministic in that way. And so when it comes to the relationship between the complex systems that produce the outcomes that we're remote viewing, yes, all these decisions are very complicated, and it would take a supercomputer to calculate the outcomes based on purely analytical considerations. But ultimately, that's just a question of our from a deterministic perspective. That would be a question of the limitations of our knowledge and of our computational complexity rather than the modal question of something being like
So are you
inherently
saying that most
indeterminate.
science is pointing to the fact that that fate is predetermined, basically?
Oh, I'm not aware of any kind of consensus view on this. I think Bohmian mechanics say that it is determined, and the Copenhagen interpretation says it's not on this, and we're talking about on the quantum level. And then but as far, I think most scientists, if they're honest, they would just admit we just don't know at this point. I mean, I think that's a really fundamental metaphysical question that that at this time
Right.
it's something that we just don't know, and we can only, it's something that only the only solution to that philosophical and physical problem is money. And what I mean is that once we have enough money to build this maybe a sufficiently impressive means of experimenting or a particle collider or something, once we get enough funding to build the big and complicated enough computer, maybe that
Right,
will
right,
resolve the problem. But or maybe
right.
aliens know and we can just ask them. But yeah, at this time I just I lean towards more of a fatalistic and
Right.
deterministic view, but I'm definitely open to
What's
being
your
wrong about that.
metaphysical? You mentioned metaphysics. What's your being that you're into remote viewing? Are you a believer in God and anything beyond this lifetime, or what is your kind of belief system about this?
Actually, the simple answer is I don't know, but what my main interest in using remote viewing to um to look at unusual phenomena, especially extraterrestrial, is precisely because I think we as a species are about to enter into a stage um, where there's going to be a major paradigm shift, and at this time we because because we're not in this paradigm yet, we almost by definition we don't know what it's going to be. And there are a couple of key facts that I think it's important to.
Wow, hold on, because a lot of people tell me this. A lot of people that I interviewed in the
Oh yeah.
past 2 weeks have told me that mankind is going to a paradigm shift, either like within a year or within the next like 15 years, but it's gonna be like something major.
Oh yeah, um and I think the psychic ability and the extraterrestrial reality are they're linked to each other, and they're both going to be part of this paradigm shift. And there are a couple like I'm definitely interested in integral theory, and to roughly map out some of the different paradigms we've been in. You know, you have some of the so-called primitive societies where there's magical, animistic, and tribalistic thinking, and then you have in the Old Testament you have more of a the power gods, like each tribe has their own god and the tribes
Right.
fight each other. And then in the Christian medieval era, you have the what I call authoritarian mysticism, where there's an absolutist way of thinking that there's it's more of a it's still tribalistic sort of, but more of a metaphysical way of thinking. Like, this is my God, it's the only truth, and that's it. And then you have after that you have the more materialistic and rationalistic
What do
stage,
you
and
think is going to happen now? Like, what's your prediction? Have you seen in the future, like in 10 years or 5 years in the future, like what's gonna happen?
I'm not sure, but it's I do have some intuitions about some basic conceptual issues from each paradigm that
Like what?
I think
Like what?
like let's see. For example, so suppose like a lot of people, some of them are abductees, some of them are military and intelligence officials. They have said that they think that Command Sergeant Major Robert O'Dean has said this, that reincarnation is real, and that the aliens that have visited us have told us this. So, I mean, you have if you have so think of this scenario: if we have aliens who are using telepathy to explain to us to explain reincarnation to us. Then you have reincarnation, which is an ancient Eastern Hindu and Buddhist idea. Not only there, but also another. But so you have that's how we tend to think of it. And then you have telepathy, which might be which is you know studied within the context of modern Western parapsychology. And then you have this extraterrestrial being who is scientifically extremely advanced, and that also that might have if reincarnation is real, then they and we both might have interdimensional components as part of our being. So then, I mean, if you think about each of those components, each of the paradigms that you think of in a lot of integral theory models will have something to say about that, because you might have interdimensional beings, which the shamanistic, animistic, and tribalistic societies believed in, and the rationalist. But then you have very complicated technology, which the rationalistic, materialistic um, view would have something to say about. And if we do reincarnate
Right.
in physical particular beings, then you know the post more the pluralistic and relativistic and perspectivistic sort of postmodern paradigm might have something to contribute towards that. And that even if reality is, the universe is real, it's always approached from a distinct perspective. So I, I think that the evidence that we have now that aliens are real, that remote viewing is real, that these are natural capacities we and they both have. You start to get a sense that causation is does not function the way we thought it did in
Right.
the
But what do you think
mechanism.
specifically? Like, do you think religion, or maybe do you think maybe, let's say, a simple thing like, do you think reincarnation will be more accepted, like after we go through this change that people are talking about? Do you think things like that? Because I don't know if you're familiar with Alice Bailey theosophy work, and but
Oh
in a
yeah.
lot of work she mentions the year 2025, the White Brotherhood, where she was getting a lot of the writings from, because I think she was a channel or something. She was getting guidance. Anyway, 2025 a year appears many times as the year where things are gonna change. And one of the books that I was reading, Glamour, talks about that the type of glamour is going to change. I don't know how that's gonna look like, but it seems like the world is going to go through a major shift in how, not just religious but spiritual, how people are. Let's say.
Oh yeah. yeah, in terms of that, I mean, in terms of like, I mean, some people think, I don't know if we'll actually like literally become another species or something, but in terms of concrete predictions, I honestly really don't know. I'm thinking of it purely on the conceptual level
Right.
of these are some ideas that are either almost certainly true, or at least have, like in the case of reincarnation, I think there is a lot more evidence for that than a lot of people realize,
Right.
that it's not just a speculative thing. And I shy away from really definite that I think this or that's going to happen, or the white brotherhood thing is interesting. The A lot of Mesoamerican and other indigenous cultures that descended from East Asia believe that there are these pale-skinned humanoid aliens, who eventually are going to, and I think a lot of them think that they're going to return, or that they already have returned, and that they might assist in some kind of paradigm shift. I'm not sure if that's what Alice Bailey is referring to, but um, yeah, in terms of what's actually going to happen, I mean, all I can say is I don't know, and mostly
Right.
what I've been trying to remote view, is my country in America going to have a civil war soon, because I'm kind of anxious about that. But
Right.
that's but and even that I haven't determined definitively if that's
Right.
going to
But
happen.
I don't think I think this election is going like because we are alluding to that. I was watching this video the other day, and like there's a thing called the walkaway movement is very big, and it occurred to me that all these walkaway videos and somebody mentioned that you never see a Republican changing to a liberal side. It's always the other way around. So I'm thinking, this is not just an underground movement, and people are, and perhaps this is the beginning of the like the spiritual change as well, because people are seeing past what I call the cultural Marxism indoctrination of the media and the school system and all that. Like I could talk a lot about that, but we're not. It's not the subject of here. But it seems like maybe people are waking up, like to use that overly used cliche that they are seeing
Mhm.
something more, and perhaps this is the beginning of big change, not just in America but worldwide.
I hope so, and I have noticed that those on the left often become right wing, but you don't typically see the other way around.
Yeah,
And I think I think the reason for that is, um,
age.
it well, yeah, age has to do with it, but the five-factor model of personality, it's the scientific gold standard of personality assessment. And and they found that openness to experience decreases with age, agreeableness decreases, and neuroticism, like anxiety, decreases, and all of those traits are positively correlated with being sort of left wing.
Okay,
So people mostly remain the same for their whole lives, but their personality traits, there are some
right.
changes, and all of those changes seem to be associated with more right wing type thinking.
Yeah, especially if
Yeah.
we go as a collective through a spiritual change, you're gonna see a lot of people changing in parties and stuff like that, ideas about the world, right?
Oh yeah, and I do think we're um I do think we're at a place of extremely. I think you're right that we're in a place of very low trust, and especially towards the government. That you know when I guess between the 40s and the 60s, and people mostly just believed what their government told them, and assumed that the government was looking out for their best interests, and all this. And I don't think hardly anyone believes that anymore, no matter who they're voting for.
Yeah, I don't think that's entirely true. I think some people do believe everything. Like I don't know. There's a big controversy about the mask and all that. I don't want to get into it because censorship. But I want to lastly I want to touch upon you're obviously very passionate about remote viewing, and just wanted to ask about your intention. You wanted to, with your website and all that, you want to spread your word out to people to know that this exists and train them basically.
Yes, and or I want to show them that this exists and that they themselves are personally capable of it, and that not only are they able to do this skill that they have always been told they can't do, but that this is a fundamental part of their human nature, and the reason I think this is important for this upcoming paradigm shift is because um, understanding this causes us and to think of all of reality in a totally different way. It's not just a new little trick that you can do to impress people or to win bets, but to realize um, mental properties are not just effects. They have causal efficacy. You can um, that reality seems to be basically non-local. That basically everything is connected, and it's connected through mental properties. There's, I mean, a lot of remote viewers have ultimately concluded through studying of remote viewing that the only what it begins to when you do remote viewing and you're successful with it, you begin to think, well, what does the universe have to actually be like for this to be possible? Because
Mm.
our understanding of causation right now, even if we're not materialists, it does seem to violate how we think of causation in terms of
Yes.
just that a very local view of causation of when we think of what something causing something, we think of maybe a ball hitting another ball, but we don't think of we can modify, and it's not just about viewing, it's about you can actually causally impact things through telekinesis. So people don't think that they can maybe there was one remote viewing experiment with the government where the remote viewer can it telekinetically moved the hands on an atomic clock that was underground, and it was very hidden. So nothing nothing can what we found is that you can't like block the effects of telekinesis. You can
Wow.
reach across the entire universe and either see something or causally impact it, even as though it were right next to you.
Yeah, I saw that
And
with Nisha's work. I mean, it's not Nisha, but Nisha wrote about it. William Tiller's, yeah, the intention host device and how it can impact the pH of water. I think,
oh yeah,
and maybe
and
the next thing is free energy. I think that's the big one. How do we get free energy? you know?
yeah, I mean, according to Dr. Stephen Greer, and I think this is likely true, one of the many reasons the UFO phenomenon is hidden from us is because uh, their technology would make the energy economy
Oh,
obsolete.
oh, I
And
see.
I mean, can you imagine? People ask about, well, why doesn't the president go and tell us? And I mean, can you imagine what would happen to the stock market if the president said, aliens are real and all of your shares of oil and any energy investment is worthless now. You're all
Oh, yeah.
everyone is broke. So,
Okay, I see. I
I
see now. I
mean,
see now. Okay, there might be, even if Trump knows this, there might be some reservation. But maybe it's the case that they've seen some of this, but they don't know how to use it yet. And maybe when it comes to that point, even Trump will be like, "Well, this is good. If I had it for myself, I would use it. So I'll give it to the people." Because he seems like he's the type of person that would do anything for, because he doesn't care. Like he has money, even even
mhm.
if the oil companies are lose a lot of money, they it doesn't impact him, and he would benefit the people. So he seems to go. he's very atypical for a person of his position because he would rather go with the majority of people rather than the elites, which I guess hate him anyway now already. So
I think that the ideal leader has to be a fearless and kind of disagreeable person,
yeah,
and a lot of times the kind of person I would want as my leader is not necessarily the kind I would want as my personal friend, like or my boss. I wouldn't want Trump as my boss, but the kind of personality, like I wouldn't want to have to work with him personally because he seems, I mean, he's disagreeable. I mean, I know that a lot of people would have much stronger language to describe him,
for
but
sure.
in terms of like he's not like a, you know, he's not like a soft nice guy. He and
Right,
I think if the disclosure movement, the kinds of people who will get us free energy and who disclose these realities, are people who are disagreeable and fearless and who don't care what anyone thinks. And
yeah,
I do think, and whether or not it's up to Trump personally, I mean, you know, it might be, you know, there are all kinds of scenarios about why disclosure is not happening, and some of them might be, hypothetically, could be scary. I mean, you know, maybe the aliens are not friendly, and
right,
uh, people would be so freaked out that they wouldn't be able to sleep at night, and so,
right.
and that's why they're not telling us. And there are so many, there are so many unknown unknowns
Yes.
that we don't know what we don't know about this.
I guess we will
And
find out in our lifetimes because I think a lot is going to change in the next 20 years. I
I
anticipate.
hope so, yeah,
Um,
and I think so, yeah.
so if people want to learn how to remote view, they can go on your website and it's for free to learn from you.
Yes, I never, well, go to exopsychic.com. It's EXO and then psychic.com.
Okay, I'll
And
put it on the link as
um,
well on YouTube and elsewhere.
yeah, and the you won't be learning from me. I have a link. It's a link of like a 20 video session with Courtney Brown and Farsight, and then I do recommend guys like Paul Smith and Lynn Buchanan, who they have some DVDs for sale. Major Ed Dames also is another one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those would be some of the more well-known professional ones that I would
Cool,
recommend.
cool, cool.
Like if nothing else, I would like to be a stepping stool, but I'm not the, I'm no one's guru for sure.
Right.
I'm just trying to point people in a direction that I think is helpful.
We appreciate that. And wow, we've done. I thought we were gonna do an hour. I said an hour and a half. So amazing. I think we've got a lot of
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, and the you won't be learning from me. I have a link. It's a link of like a 20 video session with Courtney Brown and Farsight, and then I do recommend guys like Paul Smith and Lynn Buchanan, who they have some DVDs for sale. Major Ed Dames also is another one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those would be some of the more well-known professional ones that I would
Cool,
recommend.
cool, cool.
Like if nothing else, I would like to be a stepping stool, but I'm not the, I'm no one's guru for sure.
Right.
I'm just trying to point people in a direction that I think is helpful.
We appreciate that. And wow, we've done. I thought we were gonna do an hour. I said an hour and a half. So amazing. I think we've got a lot of
Yeah.
information. I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And we'll see you next time.